Okay. I think we're good to go. So I'm going to start by, hello everybody, and a very warm welcome and a sunny welcome this afternoon as we enter week 7 of lockdown. I hope you're all very well. COVID-19 has, without a shadow of a doubt, shone a turbocharged spotlight on the value business leaders are placing on creating and managing inclusive company cultures to drive company performance. You are in for a real treat this afternoon as we've brought together 3 leading diversity and inclusion experts to discuss the strategic and operational importance of inclusive cultures. For the first half of this webinar, our panelists are all going to give you a short presentation, sharing their own perspectives on this important topic, and then we will open up the webinar to questions from all of our wonderful guests, which are all of you. So I encourage you all to ask the questions you would really love our panelists to answer by placing them in the chat box. And my role is to manage that chat box for you and to ensure that your question gets heard. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Juliet Temple and I'm the founder of 2 to 3 Days, whose purpose is to advance women's equality in the workplace through the flower of flexible working. Now for some quick intros. But before we get going, before I do the intros, I would just quite like you all to, the polling has become inactive. Charlotte, I need your help here. I can't launch the poll. So we wanted to ask you, we wanted you to fill in a poll, but whilst that's getting sorted out, I'm just going to introduce our panelists and our partners this afternoon. First of all, this lovely lady in red over here is Tia Koliani, who is the founder and inspiration behind the amazing company WIHTL, who have done some amazing work to increase the representation of women and ethnicity across the whole of the hotel, travel and leisure industry. We then have Asif Sadiq, who during lockdown has joined Adidas as their global head of diversity and inclusion, and who is a true inspiration for the award-winning work he has done across industry to advance diversity and inclusion. The lady in white over here is the lovely Yvonne Smith, who's the group head of D&I for Hays Recruitment, and who combines her recruitment and D&I experience to not only advise Hays internally, but also their clients across industry sector on the work that needs to be done to create more inclusive company cultures. And finally, but not by far least, is Sarah Charlesworth, who is the D&I manager for the global law firm DWF, who is going to share the brilliant work that they are doing to take care to modernize the way they work and look after their clients in a sector that is renowned for being slow to change. So, have we got the poll? Let me just see if we can, nope, the polls are not coming in. I don't know what's happening there. We will try and sort the polls out.
Yeah.
But whilst they get sorted, I'm going to start by handing over to Yvonne, who is going to start with her short presentation.
Thank you. The wonders of technology, hey?
Yeah.
Right. So, hi everybody. It's good to see all your names. I can't see your faces, but you can see ours as presenters. And as Juliet said, we are inside largely on a lovely sunny day in week 7 of lockdown. Juliet asked me to come along and join you this afternoon to really give you some of my takes and perspectives on where the world of work is at the moment when it comes to D&I in these extraordinary circumstances. So I thought I would start us off. You're going to hear a lot of stories, I hope, this afternoon, and the D&I agenda is very much around storytelling. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our story as Hays, but I want to really start us off with just a little bit of context and some scene setting. So Juliet asked me to really focus on 3 things. First of all, why have a D&I strategy? So, you know, why bother? And I'm aware that this audience is probably quite self-selecting, so I'm going to keep this pretty high level and fairly fast. But we'll then have a look at the impact of COVID-19 on the journeys that different organisations have been on. Some are at a very early stage and others are a lot more progressed. But has this caused a juddering halt, or actually are things going on in the background as we move from kind of crisis, transition, recovery and into growth probably at some point in kind of 2021? And then I particularly, given my relationship with Juliet and the great work 2 to 3 days does, I really wanted to focus in on flexible working, which for all sorts of reasons, I think we will kind of become a new normal to a point. And I just want to really present that, because when we look at D&I, very often flexible working is seen as cited as one of the kind of the silver bullets, but it does come with opportunity and risk. And I just wanted to touch on that. So that's what I'm going to cover off with you this afternoon pretty quickly. So first of all, just in terms of, you know, a recap, why D&I? Because it is good for business and it's good for people. So from a organizational perspective, Dni strategies and actions certainly go some way to ensuring that your business is future-proofed. At an individual level, it is very much around getting the best out of your people and in turn them getting the best out of themselves. So it is not just the right thing to do, but clearly it is very much the right business thing to do from a commercial perspective. What do we mean by D&I? Oh, by the way, Juliet, are we going to be sharing these slides?
Yes, you just
okay, then.
share
Thank
your
you.
screen when you're ready to do it.
Yep. Oh, I am sharing the screen, I feel. I think I have been sharing the screen. No? Oh, hang on, technology there. Let me just go back.
Yep, I can see your screen.
Okay, Juliet. So are you in the driving seat if I carry on talking?
Yeah, I'm
okay,
now
then.
on slide 4.
So if you just go back up to slide 3 a moment then. So what I was just quickly cantered through there was obviously the business rationale as to why organizations have a D&I strategy. So I just really wanted to share that with you, both from an organizational and from an individual perspective. And again, given my audience, I think most of you will be kind of aware of that. I just wanted to have it there for the record because we're sharing slides afterwards. Juliet, have you gone to slide 4? So what do we mean by D&I? I think that, again, just landing the iceberg image on the right-hand side of your screens here, I think is a useful one in terms of visible and invisible difference. And I think the point to make here at the moment is more so now than ever, whilst we have been in lockdown and as we think about planning our transition back into, you know, a world of work, this new normal, some of the invisible characteristics are just obviously hugely informative in the way that people see the world, how they interact with the world and how the world interacts with them. And again, as a lesson learned, I'm just really keen to ensure that some of those less visible characteristics, which are playing out in the way in which we are all coping, you know, 66 million people in the UK all dealing with lockdown in some shape or form, but in a uniquely different way. It's just starting to play out some of the concepts of what we mean by diversity, which is basically just difference. And another point to make, Juliet spoke about culture. A lot of organizations will position this around inclusion, diversity and culture. Culture sits over the top. Again, this has been a really interesting time to really help define organizations' cultures. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, depending on how they've dealt with, you know, this crisis and how we come out of it. But important to note clearly that D and I, diversity and inclusion, I and D, they go hand in hand and they go together. Juliet, next slide, please. Thank you. So turning now to COVID, I mean, obviously we all rushed for the exit and were required to do that 6 weeks ago. What we now have is an opportunity to make a more considered return. And how do we move that forward in consultation? The government is clearly holding itself back. We have a big announcement on Sunday night, clearly, with Boris in terms of a live TV address. And obviously we have our daily updates. And I think Thursday is a day when the beginnings of that kind of come through. So we have an opportunity because we are taking our time as a country to look at what others have done and look perhaps at what other organisations have done as they have either continued working in this time, or they have had a staggered workforce, or they have completely all furloughed, or in some areas have had to shut up the doors completely for business for the foreseeable. So we do have an opportunity. to not rush back to the normal. And I think actually that tone has changed. I mean, we're not all going to rush back to a normal. It's going to be a new normal. It's going to be a new era of work, a new way, certainly for the next 12 months, of how do we conduct ourselves. And it's an opportunity to really think, what do we leave behind and what do we take forward into this new era? Juliet, next slide. So the big question was, you know, has D&I been jettisoned in the rush for survival, and in us having to take decisions really quickly, sometimes on the hoof, and every day things are changing? I would say, and I would propose, there is a resounding no to that. I think the shape of D&I and what it looks like as a commitment and the way it's playing out has changed. And it's no longer being labelled as a thing and something that is distinctly different and out there and alongside our day-to-day business, but it actually has been completely embedded in the way in which we are working with colleagues, running our businesses, and, you know, to some point also, you know, arranging our own kind of lives. So if anything, it's become more integral as opposed to being jettisoned. Juliet, do you want to just change slide? Thank you. So again, I just, I was trying to think of an image that in my mind kind of captured where we were. And I was thinking about an explosion, but actually I think this concept of the kind of Hadron Collider, which is we've had all these D&I strategies and practices and policies and behaviors kind of floating around. Some of them have been going faster than others around the loop, depending on your organization or the sector that you're in. But what this has caused is for everything to get supercharged, to whiz around and kind of form a bit of a collision. And so whether we like it or not, we have very much moved into the kind of apply phase of any kind of change program, where you are inquiring, testing, piloting, and then you apply and you scale. We've had to get to apply and at scale very, very quickly indeed. So when we look at kind of D&I, Juliet, do you want to just change the screen? No, don't worry at all. I just wanted to kind of focus on the flexible working aspects. As I said, in old money, in the old world, and with Juliet's work and the work of other you know, lobbying groups, the silver bullet was, right, let's really get to flexible working, not just at something that's an earned right once you're in an organization, but actually at point of hire, which is where we, Hays, were really keen to make sure we were kind of championing that. So my view is it's here to stay. Clearly, just for the record, when we talk about flexible working, and obviously we have kind of remote working at the moment as well, again on a supercharged, on steroids basis, there are all sorts of different iterations. And again, well, if we look at kind of, you know, the concept of diversity difference, everyone has slightly different requirements. So I think it's here to stay. It's going to take all sorts of different formats. I think the point to make here is that I think that, well, Juliet used the phrase, I think, in her setup on this, which is it's kind of blown the lid off the argument not to encourage flexible working. And I think that's probably right, because as we transition back to the world of work and we necessarily have a staggered workforce and we have, you know, whatever the percentages are, but percentages working in the office and remotely, I suspect that we will have, again, time to test how we can get the best out of people and therefore, you know, company and kind of organizational productivity when you have this kind of, you know, this being a reality at scale and en masse. Juliet? And next slide. And I think that, again, what will change when we move into this new normal around flexible working in particular, it's going to not just be parents. So on the right-hand side, we've got the kind of your 1950s household setup, and then bottom right-hand side, we've got perhaps a bit more of a kind of a modern family going on. Yes, we can see that, again, top left, caring responsibilities were very much coming into play when we were looking at requests for flexible working. But I think now what we're going to go and see is a much wider acceptance of some of the passion projects and other aspects of people's lives as they integrate their life and their work, their professional life and their professional work and their personal life, I suppose. And again, just seeing how we've been hearing about the rise of the kind of the side hustle and how people want to have a look at developing different income streams. And I think we're going to see that more and more, particularly in if you like, our young people as they're coming through. So again, the drivers for allowing flexible working, I think, are going to be greater and greater, and there should be less resistance on the part of employers. In terms of risk and opportunity, Juliet, next slide. I think that, again, if we look at this, so the opportunity around flexible working and how that feeds into the D&I agenda is hugely around people who either need to or want to work flexibly. And looking at the slide that just kind of went, I think that's going to be an increasingly wide population. So that is the opportunity. You can access more diverse talent pools, people will stay and work longer, we will have more senior representation as people are able to kind of keep their foot to the floor, but in a way that suits them and suits their employer. There are risks that come with that, however, because the big caveat about this massive test for flexible working and remote working that we have at the moment is that we're all in it together. Everybody is having to experience and live through this in the best way they can. So you have children crawling over the back of chairs, you've got dogs barking in the background, all sorts of things, homeschooling, what have you, people working, flexible hours. The change, and again, it will be a transition thing, will be that as we start to transition back into the world of work and different groups are going in and out, how do we stop or mitigate the prevention of what I would call proximity bias, which is if you are in the workplace, are people going to revert to type and start spending significant amounts of more quality time with the people who are in the office? And what happens to those who are not visible and not in the workplace, either by choice or because it hasn't been well managed in terms of that workforce management. So my concern is that the fault lines might start to develop again in terms of that kind of in-group and out-group, and what does that mean for people's professional outcomes when they come to kind of progressing in their careers. So that's my big concern around a return and the whole concept, and this silver bullet around flexible working. And then really my last slide is just a tee up for us to hear from our next speakers, and whilst we're going to the rest of this webinar, which is, if the question is, has it been jettisoned? In my view, most definitely not. I think that D&I and some of the concepts around inclusion, communication in particular, and I'd like to come back to communication and all the way that manifests itself, it's there, but it's hidden in plain sight at the moment very often. And I think as we come out of D&I, out of this COVID crisis, we move into transition and into return, we must take time to breathe, to sit back and reflect, how has this informed us as an organisation and indeed our D&I commitments? And I think there'll be some really interesting stories to tell. It's just we haven't had a chance, I don't think, to pull them out yet and use those as case studies in a really purposeful way. But I think that time will come.
Yvonne, that's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. If you've got any specific questions that you would like to ask Yvonne, then please put them in the chat box and I will pick them up after we've heard from Sarah and Asif. So to get to the chat box, just go to the bottom of your screen and pop your question in there. So Sarah, may I hand over to you now and see if you've got better success in, yeah, well done.
Yeah. Good. Oh,
we're through our glitch. Okay.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to both of you. That was great. I hope you're all well, everyone out there. I'm going to share a perhaps micro view of how we as a business have responded to this crisis. I'd like to first kick off with a discussion on the effects of not bringing inclusion into our decision making. And when we look back at a global crisis that have happened in the past, we see that structural inequalities are often amplified. And I don't think we'll get to the end of this pandemic before we find out, you know, what disastrous effects or actions might have happened or happening. So that takes me to my first slide here, which you can see there's various screenshots of news articles ranging from, you know, domestic violence on the rise worldwide, the US refusing trans patients, BAME people bearing the brunt of COVID-19's economic impact, and even perhaps more lighter but potentially with disastrous consequences, you know, PPE being made for 6'3" rugby players, and you know, more in a business focused area, that Corn Ferry report on how video interviews can lead to an increase of bias in recruitment and selection decisions. So I particularly wanted to reflect here and just think about how, you know, the world has, I suppose, as everyone was alluding to, you know, we rushed and we metaphorically and physically stopped, but that doesn't mean that discrimination and inequality does as well. And I'm sure, you know, many businesses have got things right and got things wrong during this time, and we're all going through some level of survival mode. It's obviously natural. But I'm going to share how DWF has reacted to this pandemic with a focus on our D&I agenda. I recognise that I'm in a quite fortunate position. You know, we have my role at DWF, we have a governance around diversity and inclusion, we have a strategy in place. But I think there was definitely a worry from diversity and inclusion professionals like myself at the beginning of all of this about our projects, about our roles. I imagine a lot of people felt the same. And we say at DWF that diversity and inclusion is part of the way we do business. And I want to kind of share how we've kept it that way. So I'm going to share what we have accelerated, what we've continued, what we've adapted, and what we've pressed pause on. Our immediate attention, as you can see from these pictures here, is that you know, we turned to how do we take care of our people? How do we make sure that they're safe? Their safety is paramount. But also, you know, with that comes how do we take care of our people's mental health? I think early on in the lockdown, this happened, I think, before even the lockdown happened in the UK. You know, we asked our staff to work from home. We recognise, I suppose, from being a global business, we understood that kind of that early on that this pandemic would completely change the way some of our people worked. We obviously worked, quite a lot of our people worked in an agile way, but not like this. And I think from having offices in Singapore and Italy and Spain, we were able to kind of see what was coming ahead of us. And I think we were quick to understand anxieties that our people were feeling, and we took a preemptive approach with what support our people might need. So the images you'll see on this slide are the communications that we were sent via our global emails to all our people, on our intranet homepage, on our internal social media. There was a lot of resources shared. We were talking to people about what stress might look like during this time, access to the employee assistance programme. We shared resources on mindfulness, meditation, diet, exercise. We did webinars via our employee assistance programme to help people understand how they might be feeling. We shared blogs and stories, which you can also see there. And I think we really benefited from the fact that our colleagues were quite open about sharing their experiences and sharing how they were feeling. And we're consistently updating and sharing this. And I suppose part of the wellbeing focus was also to make sure our staff had accurate information. I think, you know, I remember in the beginning of all of this, there was a lot of misinformation, and there still is. And I think we wanted to create some certainty during these uncertain times. And we had global communications from our CEO, which started in January. And then we had daily emails from our CEO, which started around mid-March. And they're still continuing. And they've kind of provided a factual overview. They've cut through any gossip that might be happening in business. And I suppose people want leadership during this time. That's what they want to see. And I suppose these personal emails from our CEO, they didn't just touch on really high level business issues. You know, they talked about how people are creatively engaging with their clients, positive wins, and that, you know, trying to uplift staff morale. But also I think they were significant because I think this is the first time we'd had real global communications on well-being, on asking people how are they, get in touch if you're not okay. And as well, a big acknowledgement that a large proportion of our staff are working families and they're having to juggle all of this. on top of what's already happening. So looking next to what we continued, as I mentioned at the start, we have a governance around diversity and inclusion, and there's real clarity on our reporting. So we report to our exec board and we report to our PLC board. Last year we set diversity and inclusion targets on race and ethnicity and gender, and over the past 6 months we've been working with our divisions to create their own diversity action plans. And a number of our departments have ploughed on, even launching their diversity plans in the first couple of weeks of lockdown. Apparently it was quite a refreshing conversation change to COVID-19, which is good. So it was definitely business as usual, you know, not optional. It was seen as, you know, the same importance as maintaining relationships with clients. And we continued on with our set meeting that we had with our global Dni leadership group. As you can see there, we have 48 members across 10 countries, and we split that across 2 calls. And last week it went ahead, and had it been in the first week of lockdown, it might not have happened because we didn't have the IT capabilities. But I think it set a positive tone across the business, you know, that this agenda was still progressing. We communicate the outcomes, and I think it would have been almost unnatural if we didn't continue, given how different areas of the business have been working on their plans. And we also had a lot to report on. There's been a few projects like blind CVs and a diversity data campaign where it was good to get feedback from our senior leaders on those projects. And you know, we did sit back and assess whether it should continue, but in the end we actually had 45 people join, which I think is just brilliant and shows the importance our senior leaders are taking this agenda. What we've also looked to press on with is our gender pay gap reporting. Even though the government cancelled the deadline in light of COVID-19 this year, we saw it as vital in keeping on top of our gender balance action plans, so we have published that. Looking next at what we've had to adapt, at the start of this year we wanted to do more around celebrating diverse religious and cultural festivals. For Ramadan, we planned office iftars and local imams to come and speak. Obviously, that has not happened, but our race network was still keen to kind of recognise and do something. And we provided, you know, on the homepage of our intranet, we provided information about Ramadan, how COVID-19 is impacting it this year. We've had blogs from our Muslim colleagues, and as you can see there, you know, the Not Even Water one, which is around myth busting. And we were able to kind of adapt to our circumstance and do something, you know, similar, but not exactly the same. What we've managed what we had to press pause on, I think like many businesses, we had to cancel and postpone a lot of events. The graph there that you can see was a survey taken of HR professionals about how businesses were responding prior to the lockdown when it came to events. There's been other things where we've wanted to do roundtables with our female talent and our BAME talent in the business that we've not been able to hold yet because we weren't able to meet all together, but now we've got IT capabilities, we'll be able to do it. And I'm sure you've seen this quote on the right hand side about in the rush to return to normal, what parts do you want to, you know, what parts are worth rushing back to? I think Yvonne alluded to this as well. I think we're taking this time to review some of our diversity and inclusion strategy. Our current one ends this year, and I think if you told me to write it in December, it would be very different to what it looks like now. And I think the expectations of our people and the landscape has completely changed. So that's something that we're having to pause and reflect on. So what are some of our learnings? We're all working from home, we're not travelling, we're not in meeting rooms, we've never before had such a captive audience, and now is a fantastic time to engage with your colleagues, with your staff members. I'm quite passionate about this, that we're not working from home, that we're crisis working. You know, when I used to work from home before COVID-19, it was perhaps once a week, and it was usually to focus on a big project. It wasn't in the situation it is now. We've gone from 31% to 100% of our staff working in an agile way and working from home. And I think there's going to be a re-education needed around what working from home looks like in the future. We've had quite a lot of our staff sharing stories about working from home. We've had actually 577 conversations on our internal social media Vme account, and I've listed some of the conversations that's happened there and some of the blogs shared. I think there's been a shift in gender roles. You know, we've focused on International Men's Day for a few years now, and we're constantly trying to get male colleagues telling their stories about parenthood, about flexible working, and now you know, we're seeing a lot of our male colleagues sharing those experiences very freely, which I think is absolutely lovely to see. I think the pandemic has not been an equality leveller, but perhaps been a slightly global leveller when we're talking to our colleagues in different offices. We've all had some kind of shared experience, and even though we may never met, we're able to share a common experience. And we've had some great vlogs and video blogging from our international colleagues sharing what's happening in their locations. And as I said at the start, you know, I think wellbeing has never been more centre stage than it is now. So finally, looking forward, what we'll be planning to do is creating a robust global wellbeing strategy. You know, I think previously we've had initiatives, but not really a full-on global strategy. The next one is how we train our leaders in the new normal. So when they're making decisions that they've never made before, how do we ensure that emotional intelligence and inclusive leadership is carried out through those decisions? We'll need to review a load of our people policies, which again, as Yvonne was saying, have been quite static. I think for us, a big one will be around disability and reasonable adjustments. You know, the use of technology can be really helpful, and it can, you know, increase the participation of people who are neurodiverse, but it also can be a hindrance. You know, our Microsoft Teams doesn't have subtitles, for example. And we're going to have to think of, I think, new and innovative ways of doing some of our initiatives, keeping our networks engaged. I think that'll involve expanding some of our digital offering. I think if we do return to the office, when we do return to the office, people will be looking for businesses with integrity. You know, often after a big crisis, global crisis, people will want their values to be valued, you know. So I think people are already doing a lot in the community at the moment, in our firm anyway, and they're doing a lot in the community. I think businesses will need to look at how they will support people who want to continue working from home and want to do that more regularly than they have done in the past. And I think we already do quite a lot on diversity monitoring, but when decisions are being made in the future, we need to be, I think, extra vigilant about how that's impacting the diversity of our people. I will leave it there, and I will hand over to Asif now. But thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you stop sharing your screen? That's great. Asif, over to you, because I'm conscious of time.
Sure, thank you. So I don't have any slides, and I'm going to try to share my views, some of my recent experiences, and what I think the future is from a few different angles. So the first thing, actually, this whole onboarding during this COVID time, it's been really interesting, because I get asked a lot of questions as I'm onboarding into Adidas, as I speak to global teams around, oh, it must be really difficult, or it must have been quite a challenge. Actually, it's been great from the sort of inclusion perspective. And I'll sort of explain and elaborate on why. So the human touch has been there. That's one of the big things, right? Just because we're working virtually doesn't mean you can't have the human elements. Secondly, what I found during this period of time, as I'm meeting people, I have no bias for any team, because I'm meeting everyone in exactly the same way. We're engaging in the same way. And I'm actually finding out a lot more about individuals. So, you know, those conversations that usually existed by the water machines and so on, they're happening now in real life. As you're speaking to people, they're telling you about, you know, their families, and we're really building this culture of inclusion. So just on that point, I think it's been great to be onboarded during this period of time. However, I also acknowledge that it's been a difficult period of time for a lot of people. And I still remember when I left my last organization, and I was actually right in the middle of leaving and joining Adidas when sort of the lockdown happened and everything else. And fear right? So this fear element which comes into so many people's minds around, am I still going to have my job, especially in the DNI space where there's been a lot of discussions around, are DNI people needed? Is it still going to be relevant? And who gets taken away first? So clearly, just to sort of position Adidas, I think it's really positive with what they've done. They've still gone through with it. There was no questions asked at any point around, shall we delay your start date? Shall we move it? Shall we shift it? It was still we need to do this because it's still important to us and it still counts. So taking that on board and just looking at this whole sort of situation around diversity and inclusion, I think it's been quite challenging, more broadly speaking, when we look at what does diversity mean during this crisis. So the first thing is, we talk about remote working, but there is this perception that now because people are working from home, that we can contact them at any time, right? We can put meetings into the diary, and there's no sort of level of understanding around some of the challenges like working parents. You still have to give your kids breakfast, right? You still have to give them lunch. There's still dinner involved. So how do you ensure that that's still sort of picked up? Sarah mentioned that, we're actually in the middle of Ramadan now. Well, a lot of Muslims will be observing their faith, and especially the fact that they're at home, they'll probably be trying to pray 5 times a day and things like that. So how do we acknowledge this? How do we, find out these different things? And then the challenge, of course, of not everyone has, the space or a separate study in their house, and how do we manage this? So it's interesting that we need to actually, in the inclusion space, take out time to acknowledge that. So how do we set aside time to have those conversations around how can we best work? How can we create an inclusive environment for you? How can we still understand what your needs are in this current sort of situation? And then, of course, there's this whole sort of notion of, the impact on Vme communities, and what does that really mean for communities going forward? Well, we know it's had an impact. We know from the statistics that, unfortunately, because of a lot of the roles, frontline roles and so on being managed by people from Vme communities, it's had an impact, a high impact on those communities. And what will that mean for the world of work in the future? I guess that's where it gets really, really sort of interesting. Now, as we have started opening up stores globally, we've been thinking about, what kind of impact and what do we need to do to ensure that we still continue to create inclusive environments for the future. And, I read a post the other day, or an article, and I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but in China, McDonald's, as they opened their stores, one of their staff members decided to put a sign up saying "No Black people welcome." And this was because there was a perception within that region in China that a second wave of COVID-19 is carried by the Black community. Now, McDonald's is a big company, right? And of course, it wasn't something that the company, wanted to do, or it was the views of the company. The problem is people's emotions are running high. People are still sort of, the environment, the fear, it's all there. And that can result, it will translate into our workplaces in the future. In the UK, when we open up again, will everyone be comfortable approaching or sitting next to their Vme colleague? Don't know. Yes, I'd like to say yes, they should be comfortable. But where the papers have, for the past 2-3 months, every single headline's been around Vme people more likely to have COVID, Vme people dying from COVID. Will that have an adverse impact? So it's things like that we need to start considering, that what are we going to do to ensure that the inclusion journey our organizations have been on still continues into the future of work. And also understanding that people are going to be impacted by this, right? So people might have lost family members. What does that mean? How do we then still support them? And more broadly speaking, when we go back to work, I was looking at some plans for various organizations, including ours, around this transition into the new world of work. So the first thing that's quite clear is we're not going to have the space that we had. So, there'll be social distancing. So meeting rooms will be halved in size. Certain people will be allowed, it'll be a transition of people coming back in smaller groups and so on. But what does that mean, right? So automatically, if you look at the people who are most vulnerable, who will not be allowed back, someone who's pregnant, someone who might have a health condition, and so on. So we will again so there'll be this double penalty for those who have, certain elements of diversity or, certain things that impact them. So how do we continue to create inclusive environments post-COVID when that happens? Or will we forget? Will we then go into this new normal world and forget about these groups of our staff who are still in that sort of situation? And then we're going to remove, again, all the sort of real opportunities for inclusion in the workplace, which, if anyone's ever heard me speak before, I talk a lot about the human elements, right? So the human contact, the basic things of saying hi to someone different, having coffee with someone who's different to you, things that really create inclusion, exploring difference. Will that happen? Our canteens will probably be closed. We'll probably have, we'll be fixed to particular desks. So there goes hot desking, for those of you who actually liked hot desking, but it'll be gone, right? So how will we then create opportunities for inclusion? How will we create environments where people can still explore differences? And will it be on virtual platforms? So all these are things that we need to consider and think about. And then I also hear a lot about the fact that a lot of companies are not going to be recruiting. So recruitment's going to reduce drastically, and we're going to have this, it's going to be difficult then to recruit diversity. I actually think the opposite. So we've got all the recruitment staff that we currently have, who might be recruiting, let's say for argument's sake, we were recruiting 1,000 people, now we're recruiting 100. My expectation would be that we really focus now on capturing diversity. There's more of you, you've got time, do the outreach work, get out there and find more diverse talent. Because it's hugely, hugely important, of course, for the organization, but we have an opportunity. And I think that's where it's so critical for anyone working in the D&I space to look at this as an opportunity to embed D&I into what we do going forward. I was speaking to a colleague in an organization in the UK, and he was saying to me that, he was told that D&I is now not that important because of what the current situation is. I think that's a huge failing. Any organization who fails in that way the impact will be huge, right? As soon as we get to some level of normality, if an organization has not displayed inclusive practices when it really mattered during crisis, people will leave, I guarantee you. They will go to organizations that they believe in. So all those great fancy programs that a lot of organizations had during good times count for nothing. It's what you do now during this period of time that will have the most impact. And interestingly, even on the sort of whole concept of how do we recruit remotely, and this notion of let's do video interviews and things like that. It's great, but it's again understanding. Is everyone able to do them? How can we make it more comfortable? Should we just have everyone with a plain screen background so that no one feels, because people struggle. People struggle, and I'm currently stuck in between, by the way, in my transition to actually moving to our headquarters in Germany. But I see everyone on these meetings with their fancy offices and everything else, and I don't have that. So if that's on my mind, it's going to impact my performance. So let's remove some of those barriers, right? How do we create conversations? One of the things we do, by the way, is every day we have a question, like what's someone's favorite movie, what's someone's favorite program, and we ask people to change their backgrounds to that. So it's a conversation starter. So as you talk in the meetings, you're learning something different about each other. So I think, it's, we're going through a lot of changes, and there's a lot of things that are going to be different. But I think there's a huge amount of opportunities. There's a huge amount of opportunities. But we need to understand the impact and the impact on Vme communities. And I'm not just saying this globally. If you look at some of the challenges in America, you've got the Asian community, still being, the hate towards them is huge, right? It's huge when you read some of the examples. Will that translate into the workplace? It probably will. We are humans, and we live in an environment. The workplace is not protected from what society is. So how many people are looking at their policies around harassment in the workplace, or the tolerance around hate? Are we going to have certain messages going out that say that we will not tolerate hate in any shape or form? So these are the kind of things which I think will make a huge difference on how people feel welcome during this time coming back into into work. And I think inclusion will be a huge topic. It still is and will be going forward. But I think it will be how we react and how we create those sustainable workplaces of the future. And just the final point, I do think the whole remote working concept, I find it quite interesting where every company was trying to embrace it, or every D&I person was trying to push for it. And it was also embraced by many organizations, including my last organization. But now everyone's had to do it, right? And everyone's done it very, very quickly, which just goes to prove that something that D&I was talking about for a very long time was critical to business. And the companies who were prepared, who had done a bit of work around it, were able to survive during crisis. Yeah. So, it's just set the scene around the importance of this topic, and us continuing to work in this space. I'm conscious of time because we are overrunning.
Thank you. So many learnings and so many thoughts and inspirations. Everybody listening in, please, if you've got a question, I'm going to hand over to Tia in a minute. If you've got a question that you would like the panel to answer, please pop it in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And whilst you're doing that, Tia, I think you had some specific questions that you wanted to ask the panelists. So may I hand over to you whilst we get the questions in from our guests this afternoon.
Sure, thank you, Juliet, and thank you, Yvonne, Sarah, and Asif. I think I've been absolutely captivated by your reflections over the last whatever it is, 45 minutes or so. A huge amount of, as Juliet said, actually, inspiration. I've been scribbling, notes as to where shall I start with, because there was really so many thoughts and ideas. Let me share a couple of reflections, because I know that in the audience there are quite a few people that come from the hospitality, travel and leisure industry. And while it has been absolutely refreshing and inspiring to hear about, and I know, I'm very involved with the WF being on the board, and great to hear, all the work that, you are doing. The reality for some organizations, unfortunately, where the majority of the employees have been furloughed, where there are no customers, no employees at the moment, or virtually no employees, and whether it's a fight for survival, has really meant that diversity and inclusion has been, I wouldn't say put on hold, but a lot of companies have had to press the pause button. Sadly, it's a fact. As much as we don't like it, as much as it's going to slow down, I think, the progress that we have made and we were making prior to the outbreak, it's a reality. I can see I've got a WhatsApp group of HR leaders, and I can see, buzzing here with still questions about how are we dealing with holidays for people who are being furloughed, have the calculations being made correctly or incorrectly, how do we catch up and all of that. So that's a reality. On the positive side, I would like to share with everybody, I have been hugely encouraged this week, and we've had our advisory board meeting with a number of CEOs across the industry, where we've asked specifically that question: what would you like us to do? Do you want us to slow down? We've had to slow down in terms of our support to the industry. Do you want us to start weaving the conversation around diversity and inclusion back in? And what was hugely encouraging and inspiring was that unanimously every single one of the members of the advisory board said, we have to go deeper, we have to go faster. For some of the reasons that Yvonne, Sarah and Asif have mentioned. Employees are watching us, they're watching how we are behaving, during the period. They're watching us now as we prepare for that return to work. Lots of things, the unconscious bias, the proximity bias that has been mentioned. That was one of the things that yesterday some of the CEOs were worried about as we make decisions about who comes back to work. We know that not everybody can come back. We know that not everybody wants to come back or is able to come back. How do we manage those, bias that will creep in? They are unconscious for a reason. They will creep in how we make these decisions. how do we go about reviewing our work practices for an organization of the future where we can see a mixture of people working from home and people working sometimes from home, perhaps more often than they did before, and so forth. A huge amount of considerations. One of the things we would like to do is run the polls if we can. I'm going to try and do that from my computer, see if it works. The first one, I'm going to launch it now. Can people see that?
Yeah.
You're now viewing you should be now viewing the questions. So if you can vote. So this is, you can just vote for one, so it's a single choice.
I suggest that whilst the poll, because we're conscious of time here, whilst they're doing the polls, can we ask some of the questions that are coming in from the audience whilst people are filling in the poll? I'm sure people can do more than one thing. What are your key considerations about well-being when planning for a restart? What support and guidance would you put in place around this? Sarah, is that something that you could answer, as you've done quite a lot with your organisation?
Yeah, I can. So I think with us, we have been constantly updating our information, so it hasn't just been a static piece of advice. Because I think as we've kind of realised that every day, hour, week, it's changing constantly. So we need to be quite agile and nimble in that respect. I think we'll have to look. I think there's definitely a feeling within the business that some kind of wellbeing champion, first aider type approach might be quite useful to have, even if that's a virtual way of doing things, to support people with kind of anxieties. You know, we thought a little bit about, you know, people are going to be anxious about getting on public transport, people are going to be anxious about coming back into the office, about crowds, there's going to be lots and lots of different things that people are going to be anxious about. So that those are the kind of plans that we are currently thinking of. But I think the best thing for us has been to keep our advice constantly updated.
Juliet, may I just add something to that really quickly?
Yes,
I think that there's you've got some formal policies, you know, EAPs, you've got, you know, first aider communities, etc. One of the things that's worked really well in our organisation is, and again, it's been done intuitively by a leader who just is trying to stay close to their people and is almost kind of unconsciously role modelling good behaviour. What he does is he puts an hour and a half aside in his diary every week. And it's like a drop-in surgery. Anyone can contact him just to have a chat. And it's very kind of non-judgmental. He's an approachable guy, but it is quite interesting who is contacting him, what's being asked about. Therefore, he can build a picture as to what's happening in his population. And also what's interesting is the people who are not contacting. And sometimes that's an area for concern. So the data and what comes off that, when he opens the door, he then acts on those patterns, if you like. And I think that informally is quite a good way to pick up on some of these underlying issues.
One of the questions I had actually, which brings very unplanned onto that, is that people, I've noticed pre-COVID and during COVID are craving real role models. And how is COVID-19, what are you seeing? I open it up to all the panels, if you could jump in, of great examples of how you create your visibility as a real role model in your organization to encourage inclusivity. And you've just cited a very good example there, Yvonne, and I know from the work that Tia's done with McDonald's, with the CEO, that he has done a podcast explaining how he juggles the school run. Asif or Sarah, please jump in and give your top tips on how people in the organizations can really jump into and be really visible real role models. What are your top tips that they should do? Asif, you look.
Sorry, yeah, I was trying to say something and I was on mute. But I think the first thing is being authentic, right? And I think leaders play a huge role in this. And you know, the whole concept of not having all the answers but still communicating is crucial during this time. You know, leaders are so accustomed to only talking about good stuff, right? So when you make X amount of money, or when, you know, there's big things happening, that's what they talk about. And usually it's passed through about 10 people in corporate comms, so it's, you know, all in the corporate language. I don't think no one really sort of, I think in this time, no one wants it to be like that. People want true, authentic communication. So they want updates. They want to know what's going on. Even when there's no answers, that's fine. Saying that we don't have the answers is a powerful message. And I've, you know, I've seen that within our organization. So our leaders communicate every week. And the messages, I actually read them. And it's the first time after working for so many different organizations that I'm actually interested in reading them, because it's true, it's authentic. It's not all, you know, just good news. There's some bad news in there. But it talks about, and there's even an element of their authentic self. So about how it's impacting them. And I think what that does, which I've always talked about, is it makes it okay for others to be impacted by it as well. When you see your leaders saying that, well, actually, I found it really difficult this week because I've had, you know, my kids and I've had to make these important calls and it's been a huge challenge, you then feel it's okay because they've said it's okay. It just gives that permission. So I think that authentic leadership right now, that's the real sort of, you know, that there's no more powerful message than that at this time.
Okay, we've had thank you very much, Asif. We've had a question from a chap called Gareth, who has said, you know, there are many vulnerable groups, from BAME, men, the old. What are your top tips, or what have you seen, Yvonne, from your clients who are being more progressive? What are the plans that have been put in place to introduce them into the workplace, but also in the long term, whilst the virus is still bubbling away?
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest with you, I think that's a difficult question to answer at the moment, because we are slightly in limbo land, because we don't have the instruction coming back yet in terms of, you know, proportions and what have you. I mean, clearly, I think that the requirements around social distancing are going to sit at the heart of all of this. So we are seeing adjustments made, as if mentioned, you know, the canteen isn't going to be a place, 2 meter distancing, fewer people in offices, etc. So I think that there are actions going on that kind of protect everybody. I haven't yet seen anything specific, I must say, and I'm being honest, about what, particularly with some of the, you know, if you like, this kind of next generation of, right, if we're going to go back, who's going to be potentially disadvantaged, apart from some conversations obviously around age. And you know, and what does that mean? So I'm not very helpful on that one, I'm afraid, as yet. Do you also,
Juliet? So just to add to that, I think what's really interesting, even with that whole concept of what and who's going to go back, we've had a lot of focus on, you know, people who won't be able to come back due to health conditions and other elements. But really and truly, you know, when companies start picking on who the first 20%, for argument's sake, will end up back, I can bet my top dollar it will be the top leaders. It will be the, you know, the people who are further along in the organization, right? Or the critical roles as perceived by the organization. Yet I still feel that there'll be certain, if you look at the impact on who's been impacted the most, you know, some of the more junior staff, which, you know, again, sharing accommodation, you know, could really benefit from coming back.
Shouldn't they go back first?
Exactly.
Could I just make a comment on that? Because actually I do think, depending on the organisation, I do think that's certainly happening in our organisation, where, you know, we have you need to role model if you are senior, but actually you're quite self-sufficient. So actually, do we need the ironing board colleague where the, you know, the desk is the ironing board, or they're back in their little sister's bedroom, or they can't. They don't have enough experience to work independently. And so what does the shape look like when you actually have to basically have an element of, you know, support? And so we're looking almost in verticals down the business to go, how do you get an effective group in so everyone works well and they get what they need from each other? So, but there has been definitely some very clear direction on, if you are a leader, you need to role model the fact that you don't just go straight in and pick up where you left off.
Yeah.
You know,
and
resist that temptation.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to your point earlier, Yvonne. I think, you know, that's when communication with, you know, the people you line manage, or even a step above, needs to be talking to people about what their circumstances are and what their needs are, and actually, do they want to return? Do they not? What support can be offered? I think everyone is going to be different, and one thing that we've definitely discuss and encouraging, and we're seeing role models as well, is senior leaders calling up people or contacting people who they don't necessarily line manage, who might be within their department, to talk to them about how they're doing, just to check in with them and create that kind of authenticity, role modeling examples.
Thank you. I'm conscious people have got other meetings to go to and homeschooling to attend to. And this is a classic example where it's a great conversation, and because we've got virtual time, it appears elastic at times, but it's not necessarily. So I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to the 3 panelists and to Tia for providing a very interactive and thought-provoking discussion this afternoon. And I wish it could continue, but we've all got to crack on. And I think you've all given us a lot of food for thought. If it's okay with Yvonne and Sarah, I would like to have the opportunity to share your slides with the audience, because I think they would be very helpful, if that's okay. And we'll be sending through a video recording of today's session for those of you who want to listen to it in your own time. But thank you very much for coming on board and for the panel discussion this afternoon. Stay well, stay safe, stay inclusive, and show authentic leadership, whether you're at the junior end of the team or at the top end, because I think that's what's going to bring about real inclusive change. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.